Saida Brown, I'm excited to talk to you about interpersonal skills because the more we're working with AI and how people stay competitive, the aspect of improving your interpersonal skills, your ability to interact with other people, your ability to build rapport in ethical and straightforward ways with people in different situations is core. And this is something that you spend a lot of time focusing on and helping people with.
It definitely is. And I think we're trying to outsource social intelligence, and it's not going to work. We can't do that.
And Dana, would you do a little introduction before we continue?
It's such a pleasure to have you. Luxury Sigh, right?
Yeah,
That's your latest brand. You
right.
have such a great background in business, many aspects of business, sports, real estate, interior design, and then on top of that, you are president emeritus of the National Council of Women for the United Nations for many years, and
Yes.
came down from New York to Raleigh. And we're so
Yeah.
lucky to have you here. And you have founded what's called the Etiquette Academy here in Raleigh. And we'll
Yeah.
get you to describe some of that later on the broadcast. But it's a fabulous offering about this very topic of interpersonal skills aimed at executives, entrepreneurs, and other emerging leaders to help them to say and do or not say things they should, say the right things and stay away from the things you shouldn't be saying in everyday conversation and business. She's
To knock.
also an author, a speaker, and um, and has been on shows like Dr. Oz, and she's a TEDx speaker too.
Yeah.
So we're really lucky to have you here today, and excited to hear about. Like, I know I can use this, whether it's in business
Or at home.
or at home. I always say inappropriate things at home, and I get lambasted. So
Yeah.
I'm all ears, as
Yeah.
is Martin.
Well, I'm going to open with something that you don't know about me. I grew up with some real learning challenges where
Really?
I had to, I realized I had to learn personal skills later in life. So that's why I'm so passionate about this because it was 35 when I learned the word appropriateness. And my
Really?
friends I asked in college, I said, "Why'd you hang out with me?" When I reflected on my process was they said because you were fun to watch. And I said, but was I mean? He said, no, you just spoke what you thought was the truth with no filters all the time. And I go, it's a
That's
miracle I wasn't beaten up, you know?
my
And
son.
so because I learned these, in my view, more later in life, and I did training in something called neurolinguistic programming and a lot of skills to really develop it. And then the martial art Aikido helped me tremendously as well. It's something that I really appreciate more because I had to build these skills and later in life and realize also anyone can do it. No matter how old you are, you can improve on it. It's not like you were born with it. Where would you start for people and why this is so important?
If they were training with me, or just why did I get into this field of work?
Well, why don't we start with why you got into the field of work?
I got into this field of work because my mother actually founded a working etiquette academy in 1976 when I was 5 years old. I didn't know what it was at the time, but she was very strict and rigid when it came to putting the endings on my words, having me write thank you notes. I'm 7 years old writing thank you notes. Call this person and tell them happy birthday. And so this was something that she carried with me, that she taught me from a very young age. I had a cotillion. I was taught to curtsy, all of these things, and I just wanted to, I couldn't stand it. And later in life, I did not realize when I would need to activate that skill. And part of it is my mother lost a courageous battle with ovarian cancer, and where we fell in the economic spectrum, we had too much money to qualify for aid but not enough to fully pay for her care. And so she really didn't leave us, my sister and I, much of anything, but she left us her contacts. And my mother's contacts proved so valuable, and it was because I she gave me the opportunity to nurture these contacts and relationships my whole life, that when she transitioned, it just, I had anything you could possibly imagine at my feet. And we did a big event, a fundraiser for ovarian cancer at Madison Square Garden. Yes, the Madison Square Garden in New York City, courtesy of my mom's contacts, because they knew me from a child. And so at that point in '09, I realized there really is something to this etiquette and manners and thank you notes and phone calls. And I was still raising my children and doing what I was doing. And when I came down to Raleigh, I said, I think I need to, this is where I need to land, you know, until that's the end of me.
What a wonderful story. My mother also was someone who learned herself. I think she had some challenging herself because she was a big advocate of Dale Carnegie. And it was
Hmm.
funny as a teenager, I'm a young teenager, and she says, if you want to meet girls, read this book. And I think I read that cover to cover book of Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People, like it was like divine words. It was such a she was such a clever one as to do
Love
it.
it. I love it. I love
And
it. It's, you know, you don't know when you're going to have to activate that skill. You just don't know. So I would rather have it and not need it than need it and be caught out there in a situation where you don't know what to say, you don't know what to do, and you lose opportunities because of it. There's this hidden language of influence that if you don't know it, you just don't know it, but you don't even realize you're missing opportunities because you don't speak the language.
one of the things I think is important to start and want to get your perspective on it is that fundamental of shifting reference point from another perspective. And I remember I have a friend that's done a lot of work on children and maturing. And one of the concepts is when you don't let Betty or Johnny have their dessert until after they eat their vegetables.
Mhm.
It's the beginning of teaching empathy, but also shifting reference where they have to look through someone else's eyes to
Mhm.
see. And I think this is a beginning part. And sometimes, we have some very talented people on different levels of spectrums and others where it's a lot harder for them. But for most of us, we may not have had the chance to learn that, to look through someone else's eyes. And I
Yeah.
believe that's one of the micro steps to begin, and like to hear your perspective on that.
So I will share this with you. This is very, very true. Empathy cannot it is one of the most critical aspects, metrics in social intelligence. I grew up in New York City, and I mean New York City proper, Greenwich Village in New York City. And I remember one time we were rushing somewhere, and there was a homeless person in the street, and we were walking down to the subway, and I said to my mother, "Why doesn't he just get out of the way?" I was a kid, and my mother never hit me, never spanked me. I wasn't a naughty kid. She snatched me up and pretty much body slammed me going down into the subway because she needed to do a behavior modification action so quickly because I was not empathetic to anything. And that's what can happen in New York City. There's this hustle and bustle, go, 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 faster, faster, faster. There are very few trees, almost none in New York City, unless you go to Central Park. Everything's loud, everything's noisy. So that environment is right for a chilling and cold personality. And my mother knew enough to stop it. And so from that point on, we started volunteering. That's how I actually became involved with the United Nations and philanthropic work. I probably was only about maybe third grade. That's maybe 8 years old or something. And that is really, and it's even in my bio, that intersectionality of living in New York City, one of the most affluent and wealthy cities in the world, and 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 having that ability to be in service and of service to others. And it carried me through my adult life. Still, even the work I do today is still in service to others and humanity and the greater good. And so it really for me, the furthest I can trace it back to is when I ignorantly thought a homeless person was just in our way, and and my mom stopped that immediately. That behavior modification, she knew right then, right there, not tomorrow, right now, and so I'm forever grateful for that.
I'd love for you to share some tips of how to begin it, because I think this is one of the starting points of where to start. And I'll give one of mine and then hear yours. One is find someone you dislike or completely disagree with, and then learn to understand their perspective so well that you almost agree completely with their point as a beginning muscle developer. I've done that countless in my life. I kind of notice who, sometimes in my mind, it's like, who pisses me off? I go, oh, I need to, because I believe part of that's a projection of my own shadow of, if you aren't careful, you'll become what you hate. But I'd love
Absolutely.
to hear your views on what are some beginning muscle starts, because a lot of people just tragically, by either circumstance and or situation, or the parents had to work two jobs, or they're wealthy and they just let the kids play video games the whole time, they weren't able to develop this muscle.
The first thing I say is stop trying to be right. Stop trying to be right, and that is something that is nurtured. That is not nature. Uh, by nature, we want to be right. We want the ball. We want the basketball. We want to. We're on the playground. That's mine. And it festers and it manifests and it grows and it develops into egotistical adults. You get into a room, you have to be right. I tell people who work with me, first of all, anybody who works with me must take a disc assessment, which helps me understand how to work with them. But post that, we work continuously to pull your ego out of your daily interactions with people, and that starts with you don't have to be right all the time, and you don't know how challenging that one thing is for people. Try to
Yeah,
engage, even if you're right, don't force being right or prove you're being right. That is a humbling place to start.
one of the pieces of that not being right means you don't have to agree with them, but you have
Right.
to acknowledge their experience. And that's real important, because one of my expertise in IBM is, if we had a customer that was hostile or upset, send me in. And
Mhm.
what was important is, it wasn't that if they said IBM's a terrible company, this is terrible. It's that I was hearing them and understanding their problem, not agreeing with them. There's a difference with it.
Absolutely. That you hit it spot on. That's absolutely right. And I think part of growth and part of maturity is this evolution of how you think. I heard you touch on neuro linguistic programming, NLP. We can have an entire experience and conversation on NLP. And part of that is understanding, having empathy, listening, and not necessarily agreeing, but let's move this conversation along so we can get to a resolution. And how is the best way to do that?
I think one of the things in NLP was called shift referential index, was one of their jargon terms. I remember in the study of it, but it's learning to shift perspective. And we can easily shift perspective to something we fully agree with, but it's much
Right.
harder when we disagree with it. And I think that's where the greatest gold is. And Dana, I mean, he's known me for years. A lot of the best alliances I have are people that when we first met, we didn't get along at all. I mean, and in fact, I probably could do a show with someone that goes, I actually hated you. I went, what's going on here? And I didn't have some conversation like an encounter group. I'm going, okay, what's going on here? Why am I so triggered by this person? What's going on? I built many great alliances and referrals through people that I initially didn't like. And I think this is important to bring up, because we all have biases. We can't avoid it. It's a human, we all have egos. Now, I do have to say one thing. There was a speaker once I was training with, and she said at the beginning of the room, everyone needs to put their ego outside the door. And I said, well, then we have to leave. She looked terrified because I know I have one. It's a shield that you need to have, not throw it out the door, but you need to not let it run you and use it as the shield that's needed in certain contexts. Because there are people, especially in the corporate world, their job is to break you down as fast as possible quickly. And you better have that shield or they'll succeed in doing it. And so it's a tool that has its purpose in the right place.
I think we have to have an ego. I think, I can't wake up every day and think I'm going to run this top-notch etiquette academy, fill it up with students, teach my pedagogy, and like you have to have a little fire in your belly to wake up and feel you can do that. For me to come to a new city, I'm in a new city. This is where I am. This is where I'm going to retire. I'm going to open this business on one of the busiest streets in Raleigh and thrive. You have to have an ego to do that, but there has to be a baseline and a compass so you know when it's permissible and when it's not. And Dana will tell you, when we met, I was very quiet. From the time I walked in the room, I never said a word until we got into a smaller committee. I would say, smaller, table talk, and that's when I started to share. But he'll attest. I didn't walk in that room slinging titles and dressed to the nines and treating people like peasants. Absolutely not. And that's because there's a modicum. There's this there's something inside of my spirit and my body and my soul that says you have to come humbly before other people. The biggest leaders always start at the lowest point. To be a good leader, you have to listen, you have to follow, and you have to really have a gauge on reading the room. And that's something I think is a lost art, being able to read the room as well.
Well, you certainly did demonstrate that, and you made everyone comfortable as a result. And I think as because of that, people opened up to you. And
I think
in listening to you guys talk, like when I first started, when I was in corporate America, I was trained in interpersonal relations, and I became the trainer. And I remember that the definition between empathy versus sympathy, and I think that's what you're
Well,
talking
that's
about.
a
Is
nice
empathy
distinction.
is where you understand, validate all the things you describe,
right.
right? But sympathy is where you actually agree and have those
Uh-huh.
feelings. The other thing
Right.
I'll tell you, and I'm sure you address this all the time, we live in a society. A lot of us as Americans, we instead of listening, instead of listening, we tend to be thinking about what we're going to say next, right? As that generalization. And I find myself doing that. And when I flip that around and I try to just listen and validate those feelings, whether it's business or personally, I'm always a work in progress on this because I want to chime in and let my little ego with my fact-based logic brain kick in, and it doesn't work well. In all cases, it depends, right? But that idea of active listening, right? I'm sure that's what you train. And I just want to say, we were talking about job search and job hunting, and I know you have some stories about people doing really well in networking and interviewing for a job hunt, and I know you have some stories of people that didn't do so well. Without naming any names, can you give us some samples of both those spectrums?
Well, one of the things I can think of, we shared behind the scenes. I work with politicians. And a politician is perpetually trying to get elected, which is trying to get a job. And I worked with a particular individual who had just been newly elected to office, and really just was not handling himself in a way that an elected official should. And he had people doing very inappropriate things in his campaign videos, and it was a difficult conversation. I probably should have given a different example, but the point is this: we have to do what we can to try not to get fired at the holiday Christmas party. And that's one of the things you and I talked about behind the scenes. How do we walk into these rooms, know what to say, know what not to say, and we also discussed how I became president of the National Council of Women, how I even segued, and I was at a networking event. I did my homework on who was in the room, and when the opportunity presented itself, I was already studied with their interests, with things were of interest to this particular individual, and it really has carried me far. So I would say working with people who are trying to get a job, learn the company, learn who the hiring managers are, learn who you're supposed to be meeting with, and that carries you much further. I can think of a lot of stories, but as I'm thinking of them, names will come out. So I'm not very good at that.
Well, and the idea, like, we're coming up on the 4th of July holiday, and people who are in job search, this is a perfect opportunity to be passively job hunting and networking and so forth, right? And I can see where something you might say over a drink or something at a 4th of July party could actually help you to have that when they say, "What do you do?" And it's interesting. You should ask. I'm a CFO, and I'm looking for a new opportunity here in the Triangle. Well, what you say next is either going to be that person's going to think, "Hey, maybe I should introduce you to somebody," or "I'm never going to introduce that person to somebody," right?
Mhm.
So,
Finding
So
something to open the door. Well, I'll tell you, one is what you said is just make, if you're going in to try to prove you're right, that's going to generally not work well. And most of these is a starting point.
right,
And it doesn't mean you have to agree with everything they're saying. It's like developing that massive of saying, well, I have a different perspective on it, which is different than you're wrong. In jobs and other things, often people, especially in leadership, want to know that you're not just goo that agrees with everything. They won't trust that either. They want to know if they push in, there's something that stops. And that's a skill that also doesn't get developed just by staying in a cave. You have to actually get out, make some mistakes. And I love telling people that are working on this is find unimportant places to practice. You're maybe in a grocery store. You're maybe and it doesn't mean the people you're talking to aren't important, but it's more like you're developing that muscle of being able to talk about the weather or unimportant topics that give room for us as Homo sapiens to start getting a sense of trust or not. And I've worked with so many engineers where they just didn't have this in their DNA, but they couldn't get a job because they had to build enough rapport with the gatekeeper to get to the person like them as a boss that could see how smart they are and bring them in. And
so
so that's to me one of the key beginning pieces. Go ahead.
if I may, there's this pocket of our society that I would fit neatly into that pocket where there may be 45 to 55 years old, and we were taught don't use the company phone, go to college, pay your taxes, don't steal company time. All of these things that we were taught, and the rules have changed. The rules of engagement have changed. And so now we find ourselves, due to globalization, technology, new wind turbines, coal, solar, that where do we fit? Where do we fit in this world? And so I think those people who are searching for a job, or people who are in that that group of individuals that I named, if they're job searching, or if you're going out 4th of July, be up, be knowledgeable of current events, be knowledgeable of what's going on in this world. We cannot stay stuck. I have 3 interns with me this summer from the Hope Center, and they are young students. They're teenagers who are aging out of foster care, and my responsibility is to help them with job skills and life skills before they age out of the system, so they have a better shot at thriving as adults. The first 30 minutes every morning is spent on current events. This morning we talked about the debate last night. We also talked about LeBron James' son being drafted to the Lakers. And then we talked about what impact the weather is having on citizens in Raleigh. So those are the 3 things that we talked about. And I said to them, sometimes it's better to go a little wide and know a few things about a lot of things than to just niche down. And these are teenagers, 15 and 16-year olds that I'm with 4 days a week for the next 6 weeks. And so if I can have my young people start out every morning, what is in current events? What are we talking about? What is in the zeitgeist of the narrative in society? Adults should kind of do the same thing as well. We cannot walk around like an ostrich with our head in the sand and say, well, I just don't get it. You're going to lose opportunities. And I'm preparing these young people for opportunities. And so, they don't know much about Joe Biden. They don't know much about Donald Trump except what the adults around them, what they hear adults around them say. But today I help them form an opinion, politically agnostic, based on the candidate's performance and based on what they said about how this economy can move forward. But at least we discussed it this morning, and adults should do the exact same thing.
I think that's outstanding. This reminds me of two things. One, I went to St. Andrews, which is now St. Andrews University, and my teachers were pretty progressive. But if you started to side with them, they would take the complete opposite side. And you were so confused because they wanted you to really think for yourself. And I remember, well, isn't he more, progressive than conservative? And would switch on a dime to force us to do that. And I think that's real critical thinking. Now I have to tell a really funny story when I was the manager of Radio Shack, because I don't follow. Yeah, Radio Shack. Oh yeah, I have a great many stories I can't tell in public, but anyway,
You can tell that one.
yeah, this one I can tell at least. So I'm young. I'm have my first store, and I'm in Raleigh. And Raleigh is in the Triangle's a big sports center. I mean, the sports is pretty important here. And I have so little interest in sports at my university. I went to a basketball player in the gym and I said, that was a great game. It'll be a great season. And I think he almost hit me because it was their final game. And we're in a school with only 800 students. That's how little I'm paying attention to sports. You got it? And he looked at me like, you jerk. So what I would do is my co-employee loves sports so much that he'd remember girlfriends' names by jersey names, like the jersey numbers. Okay. Young guy dating everything. So I go to Brad. I think his name was Brad. I'd love to meet him when he had a twin. I said, Brad, what do I say today? And he'd say, just say, how about that wolf pack, and listen. That's what he would do. So literally customers would come in. I'd talk and I'd go, well, how about that wolf pack? And then I just listen, and they would buy all types of stuff, and the next one he would say, it's a shame. Did Duke really do that? And I had no idea anything beyond that little phrase, but it was killer. And Brad would hit me up with the question, and it would be on fire. And it's really what you're saying. Of course you should know more of what they're saying, but if you can't have that, at least have a good coach firing you in the right direction. I think what you're saying is so important. And Dana got to meet my mother while she was alive. She was an avid researcher of what goes on, and what occurred, kept up with global news. Of course, living in DC, we would go into a convenience store or something, and someone who looked like a street person, you'd have a debate about international Israeli, Palestinian stuff, and they'd be smarter than you were, and they might look like they lived and might even live on the street, and they knew it then. But this is an important thing to bring up, is at least have enough knowledge of what's going on. What a great gift you're giving those young people so that they can have a conversation, know something, so you can at least have a conversation. Because really all it takes is a few questions, a little knowledge, and then want to hear what they have to say.
That's it. And every day they know when they come in, we get our snack, juice, whatever it is. I'm having coffee. 30 minutes. We're talking about current events. Okay, so what's in the narrative in the world? We talked about the Drake rap beef with Kendrick Lamar one day. Like it doesn't matter, but we have to discuss it, and I need you to formulate an intelligent opinion about it. And then I'm like, okay, it's 10 o'clock. Let's get this day started, guys.
Yeah.
Every day.
What a great discipline to start. I do want to tell you, I found someone that's attempting to show balanced news, and I've been trying to reach out to interview her, and it's actually if you look her up, it's Jordan is my lawyer. It's a young woman. Jordan is my lawyer, and she's actually trying to show both perspectives on the news. Because see, I grew up in DC where news was they at least took pride in trying to show both things. If you were in the media and you let your card down to say you had a bias, your career was over back then. And now it's like both sides are like, well, I hate blue. Why hate the green side?
Well, what I want to say in
Yeah.
this is such I think it's such a great timely topic. Yeah, in the way this conversation is going, you think about a job search today,
Yep.
like when you're out there, you don't know if that person is one political persuasion or another. I think it's important because of today's climate, okay, politically, you don't know. There's like a 40% chance that a person will be of one political persuasion staunchly, and a 40% chance they'll be of another. And I think if you're job searching, you've got to be really sensitive to that. And, maybe, I mean, the old rule in the old days is we didn't talk about politics and religion and business.
Mhm.
Okay. But I think that's been broken, that's kind of faded away in many ways, and you could be not intentionally doing that but trapped into it as well. So but I think being sensitive to this, if you want a job, you have to kind of play the game of, I'm not going to reveal my cards too much unless I know I'm in a space where it's going to be well received. Is that something that you talk about at the academy?
It is. And so here's the thing, you have to have an opinion. And this is where social intelligence comes in. You have to be able to read the room and know when to go and when to stop, right? Because you don't want to come in and have no opinion. You have to stand for something. Now, let's not start talking about abortion or immigration or things like that. But you have to have an opinion, and you can say, I have very strong political opinions, but that's not something I really feel comfortable discussing right now. Done. You have, but you cannot pretend to not have an opinion, or I don't talk about those things, or those things don't interest me. Though that'll destroy you more than saying, I have really strong opinions, but that's not something I feel comfortable discussing right now.
That's a beautiful
Yeah, I love
statement.
that.
Yeah.
It's kind of
Mhm.
like someone often sometimes people ask about my own faith and I view myself as a Christian, but I go, I just generally that's very private and I don't talk about it publicly. And I think that's such a great way to have it because you have a perspective. And also, an add on to that of what Dana said is don't assume because they look one way or another. Don't assume they have one direction and try some trick to build rapport by being on that side. You'll get trapped, you'll get in trouble. It's better to listen and understand what it is and then, you know, be careful of going off on rants. What did we put a quote in our on our publication, our slide for jobs? What is it? No one ever saw a political rant on Facebook and said, "Oh my gosh, I should change my party now."
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? That. First of all, I love that because that's not what sways us. It those our opinions are formed over a period of time. But Steve Stout, there's a guy, an ad guy, Steve Stout. He wrote a book in, I want to say 2012, entitled "The Tanning of America." And this book is so fantastic because it talks about how before, years prior, if someone was black, you would assume they were a Democrat, or if they
Yep.
were European or white, you would assume they were a Republican, or if they drove a fancy car, you would, there were all these broad brush assumptions that we would make that we just can't make anymore. I remember my grandmother, I had the privilege of traveling at a very early age with my grandparents, and my grandmother would get dressed up to go to the bank, dressed up to go to the airport, any place we were out in public. Saida, let me brush your hair. She would put on pink lipstick before we walked out the door. Now you can have a multimillionaire standing at you know, a red light driving a lower end model car and have just sold his company for $3 million. You can't make these assumptions anymore. And that's what's causing that's causing some hiccups in our society because historically we were able to have these biases that we were allowed to fester, and you just can't do that anymore.
Well, there's also the generational issue too,
Yep.
right? Of like we use terminology. You and I talked about this. Like we use certain terminology as, for our generation, baby boomers,
Mm.
and it just doesn't fly with younger people. And then some of the terms they're using, we're trying to adopt and understand. And that's another, not to confuse everybody or make you paranoid when you're in job search about, I don't dare to say anything, but I think just being aware that there are sensitivities that are out there that if you really want to get a job, you have to be very careful about expressing strong opinions that somebody may take offense to. But like you say, kind of maybe just try to defer that or soften it a little bit. Don't dismiss them, but
Not at
say,
all.
yeah, but say something that can kind of move the topic to something else and this kind of thing in a very smooth fashion, right? This whole thing of networking is so tricky, and even though I do a lot of it, I still am not comfortable with it. Because yeah, I mean, I feel like I have to be on alert. I feel like, okay, who do I need to meet? Who's who? And I'm the type person, like Martin is very extemporaneous, right? So just like when he opens this program, he doesn't have to think for about, well, you saw it, about 3 minutes about how do I how do I come up with a very interesting opening line. I would probably stress over it for about 4 weeks,
All
right?
right.
Like, what am I gonna say, to introduce this topic? And so it's just different, right? So people that are extemporaneous, I think, can kind of show up at anything and be present. Whereas I would, if I had my way, I would know something about every single person in that room before I even stepped into that room. Do you see what I mean? That's just me.
Yep.
And then I could have some good conversations, because I could know, like, if I'd been I knew you were going to be at this event in Raleigh last week. I looked on your LinkedIn. I would have said, "Hey, I noticed something about you. You grew up in New York. You work and you're running an academy here." I would be able to express this to you. That to me is a more comfortable approach. But I know other people don't feel that way.
There's something to be said about being reserved, right? But I think if you're actively job seeking, you have to put your reservations in your pocket about meeting people, about talking with people, not about your governance or how you comport yourself in public, but you have to put all of those feelings aside. And your goal is to talk to as many people as possible every single day. And then stay in touch with them and build your database. I remember when I was in real estate many years ago, we had to have 10 database ads every single day. And a database ad was where we had a substantial real estate conversation of more than 3 to 5 minutes with somebody specifically about real estate. And if we did that, then they qualified as a database ad. And so you can't do that if you're shy. You have to go out and talk with everybody. And you don't shout from the mountaintop that you're looking for a job if you're in line at the grocery store. Strike up a conversation. Those shoes are great. Oh my gosh, where did you find that bread? Who cares where you found the bread? Doesn't There's no consequence. You need to talk with people and find out who they are, what they do. I'm going to give you a really good tip right now, and I'm sure both of you will agree. If you want to meet high achievers, go to the gym at 5 a.m.
Yeah. Yeah.
I worked out, and this is just the God's honest truth. I worked out next to a judge for a year before I knew she was a judge. We took spin class together and we sat in the back and we talked every day. And then finally, I heard someone say to her something random. I can't even remember what it was. And I didn't say anything. It wasn't my conversation to be a part of. And I'm like, when she left, the other girl who was with us in the spin class said, she's a judge, right? I said, a judge of what? Like, uh, that's a judge? Had no clue. So we had built this amazing relationship over time. I never needed her or went into her courtroom, thank God. But the point is, if you really want to meet decision makers and high achievers, join a gym and be there at 5 a.m. 4:45 a.m. I promise you, that's where all the high achievers are.
What a fun tip. That's excellent. One of the other things you talked about in networking events is giving yourself permission to learn how to walk up to a few people that are talking and interact, and then how to break away, because people who don't have these skills, it's scary, like, I'm going to be stuck on talking to one person. What you do is you see people are talking. If it's a very closed physical environment, that might
Right.
not be open. But if they're more open visually, then
Yeah.
just walk up and smile and stand there a minute. And if they don't include you, it's a networking event. They're not That's not the place for a private conversation. And that can be enough to be a door opener. But I want to acknowledge it can be scary for people the first time if they haven't done this. But you only learn it by doing, and then having ways to break away. Gosh, it's great meeting you, and I want to take a little time to meet some other people, but thanks so much. Love to connect if you're comfortable on LinkedIn. So then develop your own repertoire of how to break. I remember when I trained in stand-up comedy, there was a whole book my instructor had. They're called savers, and it's what you say when you bomb with a joke. Like, well, that was funny in my head, but it's not now. So you see that those are like transitions that you'd use, and or, well, hey, now I know a joke I shouldn't bring out in public again. So he actually had a book entirely on savers. So it'd be great if you sometime had a list of ways to break, because some people are afraid to go in, they'll get stuck, and some people are afraid because they don't have ways to break out. And if they have no life experience of this, they almost need a little coaching in ways to do it and experiencing do it. And another thing that you do well with some people in networking is go with a friend and say, our job is to help each other meet other people, like a tag team. And that can be very useful too, where you're both working together, you're working with someone else to introduce them. Any other tips you have in that, and just maneuvering into a place with people you don't know?
I teach a class called Make Money Mingling, the art of networking.
Wow.
Nice, nice.
So you can make, and I just say make money mingling, but it's really about building that database. And if you go in to whatever room it is, first of all, you hit something spot on. Look at the body language. If people are close together, that's not the pod for you at that time. But if there's a way, maybe three or four people, and there's a way you can stand there and just listen and then add in, by all means go right ahead. But the goal, in my opinion, for networking should not be to get a job, should not be to usurp the resources in the room. It should be, in my honest and profound opinion, to have a database add this person to your database. That way you start, I call it a drip campaign, where you have the ability to, hey, we met 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months. 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months. In 2 days, follow up. Hey, we met 2 days ago. Da 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 da. In 2 weeks, if you hadn't heard back, hey, we reached out. Da 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 da. 2 months. Hey, 2 months ago we met. Da 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 da. So I feel like if we're just going in for a database ad, what's there? It reduces your ability to feel goofy because you're not asking for anything. I just want to stay in touch with you. And then you go for your ask at a later time. But when I say make money mingling, the art of networking, to me that means, and what I teach is, all you want is a database ad, period. Because if you're building your database, you're going to have such a reservoir of people. Someone owns a dry cleaner, someone bakes cakes. That's what makes you valuable. And now when you're out talking with other people, you can say, wait, I know somebody. Wait, I met somebody.
Yep.
But if I go in specifically looking for a job, you likely will end up with egg on your face.
Well, there are two things out of this. One is introducing the idea of having a CRM, a
Oh,
content manager. And I use one called Nimble. In fact, I've interviewed the founder. He's now moved to which is in Western North Carolina.
Asheville.
Asheville, North Carolina. Right. It's called Nimble, and it's a really good one. It's called a social CRM. So when I put the person's name in, it actually goes out to the web and hunts for them and says, "Is this them?" And this is, but it lets you tag them and put it in the calendar to do reminders in the future. And if you send an email, it lets you know if the email was open. So I think that's a very important aspect of it is used, but they're also free CRMs. So if people are in between jobs, just search for free CRMs where you can get something and have one that you control. Sometimes we used to call it the golden Rolodex for people who are old enough to even know what that is. And it's like you're, keeping track of people. And then you can put notes in it. If you aren't good at remembering, you'll go, oh, this person really enjoys golf. And you make a little note in there. And I believe that more than using LinkedIn. If LinkedIn gives you an area or something like that, keep it in your own control. Some people could even use note cards if they wanted to and have index cards with notes. So I think that's an important aspect. And the multi touches that you said are two really big ones to kind of keep up with. And like my famous quote in networking is, do you leave your house alone or with a team of great people? And what you're saying is you're building up that team of great people. Do you know someone? And I've had people around the state say, Martin, you're probably one of the most networked person. Well, that means if they ask, I know someone. And it's
Absolutely.
okay to have to say, I just met them. Share the relatedness you have.
That's what makes you valuable. I mean, I shared at the top of this conversation that my mom left me her contacts and her relationships, and I talk about in my book Bloodline that my grandmother used to have a phone book that she kept on top of the refrigerator, and every January she would buy a new one, a new address book, and have me rewrite everybody who was in it, sans the people who had passed away. And she would call them. But when my grandmother passed away, I had her address book. I had my mother's Rolodex. And you don't know how far these relationships can carry. We've all heard it's not what you know, it's who you know. Those are the people that'll give you the little alley oop, basketball notwithstanding, but give you a little leg up if when you're looking for something. If you put money in people's pocket, they will take your call. People take calls because when my name comes across your caller ID, I'm not calling over foolishness. I'm not calling over nonsense. Hey, Saida, what's going on? That's what I get on the other end when I call because I lead with value and I don't just call asking for things, asking for things. Do you know, hey, who can I call? We have to do some work on our own, but I just referred a gentleman to a friend of mine who helps with credit. I sent her, call this guy, and then I sent him a text message. Hey, I just referred this person to you. And he said, thanks, Saida. That's going to put money in his pocket. And she's going to answer my calls because I helped her fix a situation that wasn't so pleasant that she needed to get out of. And so you can't do that if you don't know people. I'm not married to either one of them. They're not my best friends, neither one of them. But the more you make yourself valuable, that puts money and resources and opportunities in your pocket.
Yeah. Yeah.
Social capital.
That's it. I was thinking
Social
that
capital.
word. That's it.
As you all are speaking here, a couple thoughts come to mind as I think we're closing up
Mhm.
here. And this has been delightful. Number one is that I learned a long time ago with the networking thing that to put we talked about ego earlier. It's really we're all tuned into the station. We've all heard it. What's in it for me?
Mhm.
WI and also most wonderful word for anyone to hear in the English language is their name.
Mhm.
So one of the things I always try to do is to when I introduce myself, use their name and make eye contact. I know this sounds silly,
Mhm.
but really get in there, really put myself aside for a minute and just really try to get that initial engagement, from that conversation. The other thing that we tell people who are clients that are in job search is that if you're and Martin is a master at this, but if you are out there and you can get the other person to talk first about what they do or whatever, all right, that is a winning combination, all right, or a winning strategy because they open up about themselves. It gives you opportunity to do that relational part and to find out if they're really interested in you. Because if they talk first and they never ask you about yourself, you know what you're dealing with. And we tell people, move on, be
Mhm.
polite, but say, hey, it's been nice talking to you.
Well,
Move to someone that really cares about you too.
That's right.
that's right. The
I
old enough about me. What do you think about me? right? As a warning sign.
I tell people use FORD, FORD, family, occupation, recreation, or dreams. FORD, FORD, family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. So
That's
whenever I
delightful.
That is
That's great.
unbelievable.
Great. That's great. Thank you.
but so if I'm in a networking event, it's processing in my mind. Family, do I have possibly familial something in common? Occupation, recreation, do they look fit? I'm making these broad brush assumptions because you have to say something or dream. I can say, oh my gosh, that blue shirt, Dana, that you have on reminds me when I went to Jamaica and the water was so blue. I mean, that's just something really random. But you have to, when you're walking into a room cold and you don't know anybody, family, occupation, recreation, or dream, board, find somebody. There's one person in that room that you will be able to connect with one of those four metrics to start a conversation. Look for
That is
someone in the
awesome. I love that acronym.
Yeah, I know. It's great.
So,
board. Board. It is. That's what gives me the confidence to walk into a room because I know one of those four X factors I can find with somebody
and
just by
the other thing I've learned is to be authentic too, because if I demonstrate, if I'm asking, but I'm not authentically interested, um, you know, people detect.
Some people are data people and they just don't like people. They might like dogs and others, but they're still brilliant people. So sometimes, Dana, you have to come from the commitment of building the relationship and then authentic from it because we're not all wired where we're drawn to people. And there's so many valuable skills in the world where thank goodness they weren't drawn to people or they wouldn't been in their cave enough to invent it. The only thing I'd add to
Yeah.
that is I'm an advocate of authenticity from a commitment. Then that fits across multiple platforms. If I like people, then okay, well, my commitment is to have good behavior, not to whine about my shoes hurt or something. Or if I don't like people, but I like data, well, my commitment is to get a job. So I'm going to learn how to interact in this thing and give themselves permission to do it and relate to it. And that's why I have a little slightly different version because
Mhm.
those are the toughest ones. The really bright people that the truth is, if you ask them, do you like people? They'd probably say, no, I like data.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. We have a world and we need all these people,
Yeah.
you
Tell us
know?
about the commitment part.
Well, the commitment I'm an advocate is commitment has consistency. Feelings don't. So where is your commitment in this role? And that's where I go to because I think authenticity is just terribly overrated. But then we don't want to mislead or lie. Okay. So where do we go? Where do we have a reference point? And where this comes from me is when I learned about NLP and started getting out of my own shell, it was terrifying because I had not really developed where I was standing. So you're going into other people's world, but you don't have an anchor to come back to. I went, oh, I had developed in my learning challenge a shield to not go into their world because I hadn't given myself permission to identify what I'm about. So what happened is I figured out, okay, what am I committed to? My feelings are all over the map. What am I committed to? And then identifying that as my anchor. And then I could go and have empathy moving into the world. And I had a place to come back to this. And so that's why I've been so effective in my own coaching style of building a paradigm of the client and then being able to see it like this three-dimensional image and go, oh, that's a sacred wall. We're not going to move that easily. Oh, we can move that resource over to here. And that's where it came from commitment. I'm committed to serving my family, getting a job, and being of value to them. Okay, then I need to build some skills interacting with these. You see what I mean? And that's the thing I think we don't address enough. Go
I
ahead.
I was just thinking more simply.
Oh,
All
okay,
right.
good. You
And
can,
I'll
yeah,
give you an
yeah,
example.
go.
Let's say somebody goes through her academy.
Mhm.
They've learned this in the academy,
Mhm.
I'm sure, but
Yeah.
a job seeker. And they're going out, they've not had to do the networking thing, and
Mhm.
they've gone out after 20 years of being in their career. And they're like, tell me about this networking thing. What I meant is like, the aren't typical brand new salesperson,
Yeah.
okay, that comes up and says, "Hey, Dana, tell me about your family." And I
Mhm.
tell them about my family, all about it, and then a couple other things, and then 5 minutes later they go, "Do you have kids?" That's what I mean. It's like, I've been coached to ask
Right.
these
Right,
questions,
right.
but I'm not authentic and true to
Yeah,
truly listening.
yeah,
That's what I was referring
yeah,
to.
yeah.
I've seen that happen quite a bit where people are, they know in the back of their mind, I got to do this. I don't really
Yeah.
want to do it. And somebody
Well,
said I should ask about them. So I'm asking, but I didn't listen. That's the kind of authentic I was
I have an
talking about.
answer for that, and then see what you think. From the side, from coaching people, or in, I call them engineering minds. They're very
Okay.
and they're very cerebral. They sort more for the internal than external. And what I say is, do you enjoy in your mind having new adventures to explore some things like thought experiments? Yes. Why don't you, when you're talking to them, build a model in your head of their world like you're going on a,
Oh
and that
wow.
gives them something to do, literally,
Oh,
so then they can start building that, and it has the perception of listening, so they're like building this model like they're on a journey, okay? And that was my own process I developed that was very helpful for the person who just didn't have those skills. So that's, and it shows up. It's just like the idea of being committed to your career and integrity in today's job market looks like loyalty in a company,
right.
but it actually is better for your survival. I mean, I literally had a client where the boss goes, "You're the most loyal person here." And they come back to our coaching session. So I didn't tell them that my commitment is to my future. And of course, doing good work here was key to get it. But they think I'm highly loyal.
And that's okay.
That's
That's okay.
okay. Don't correct
Okay.
them.
That I had someone tell me since I've been here, um, Saeed, I need to talk with you. And I said, "Oh, I'll make myself available to your schedule." And when we finally got on the phone, she says, I don't feel you're as committed to our relationship or, our friendship as I am.
Oh,
York, I had never heard that before. uh, and she went on to say that she has invited me to a few things and I'm always busy. And she has invited me to her home, which I did go with a bunch of other women. And I was very gracious. I brought it, I did all the right things. But she just said my communication with her is subpar. And I was so taken aback. And after she said that to me, I became much more committed to our friendship, to building relationship. We're doing something together, a nice event on July 6th, the community event. But I was so shocked because I feel like I'm gracious to everyone, but she had, she was intentional about building a friendship and a relationship with me, and she challenged me on it. And I had to listen, and she was absolutely right. And now we are doing much more amazing work together than I could have done separate. But I think in our job search and all of these things, we have to have a level of confidence. Can you imagine somebody in my position, in my stature, and someone telling me very flatly, you're really not committed to our friendship?
Mhm.
Oh my
Yes,
gosh.
I get it.
Wait, who are you again? And she's a person, just a person. But the point is that told me I need to not be so dismissive of people. Like, hey, how are you? And keep it moving. But also, it told me there's some things that she wants to accomplish, and she needs my assistance. If not right now, at some point down the line, and she's making her intentions known. And I think job seekers and people who want things, who want more out of life, high achievers, we have to walk with this level of boldness, not entitlement, but boldness to state what we want. And then it's up to the other person to either accept or reject that.
I really want to add something to that because there's another piece of it is learning what that means to them.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you? What does relatedness mean? And being
Oh,
prepared to go, I think you're right. I'm not committed to, because that's the toughest thing to do, because you cannot be fully committed to everyone. And really, the most effective people in business, I heard someone talking about founder of Apple, Steve Jobs, and Elon Musk. Now, you may or may not like him, but there's one quality that I heard on both of them. They're masters of saying no.
Oh,
And so you
yes.
can't say yes unless you can say no. So the flip side of that would be, you might have, and I'm sure you did it. You probably had a conversation. What does this look like? And then you went, wait a second, I want to be part of this. I want this. But it could have also been you had a conversation where you went, you're right. I'm just not committed to that right now. And that's equally important to have that, build that muscle. And you don't build that muscle by reading books. You have to get in the world and have some mistakes to learn them, to be able to go, you're right, I'm just not committed to that. And I had someone who really, a student who really wanted me to do a lot of things and so forth. I said, look, I'll encourage you all I want. I'm just not willing to go there. You don't have to give any other explanation. So I'm going to end on a humorous note. Okay. My friend and best friend in Japan,
Rick.
Rick, they have a tradition in Japan. Now, remember, we grew up in college, so we can regress to about a 12-year-old boy in 0.9 seconds quickly. But he went to Japan, and there's a cultural thing that if they say it's my tradition, no one ever asks, questions it. So, if
Oh,
you
wow.
ask, yeah, why do you do this? Well, it's our tradition. And I understand. So Rick is a young man. If he had a social behavior he didn't want to change, he would just go, my personal tradition. And the Japanese go, oh, so sorry, Richardson. Oh, so sorry, Richardson. I thought I live a. Now, I don't encourage doing this behavior, but it's so funny because I saw it happen when I visited him. He goes, my personal tradition. Oh, now he's kind of matured beyond it, and he's a highly respected professor at the university and everything else. I don't think we'd ever see
Oh,
that come out of him. But every culture has their unique quirks, and that's the other fun thing, is learning it. There's a realtor here, Linda Kraft, great person, and she one time said, "You have the most diverse friends of any human I ever met." Well, it's because it's like going on a journey, learning another person, finding out about them, and go, well, what's it like for you?
that's right. Oh my gosh, I love that. It's my tradition. I
My
love that.
personal tradition. My personal tradition. Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic and really great, and so exciting to have wonderful dialogue with you, and tell people how they can learn more about you. We'll put the links to your LinkedIn and other things below as well. But
Website.
yeah,
I think for the
website and
academy.
the academy. And I do want to, I mentioned, I want to introduce you to Sharon Hill, because then if she's hearing, I know she'll go, well, Martin, you didn't interview me. So Sharon, if you hear us, we'll include you. She's another great person. But that's what happens in your network. I want you to meet and realize you could look like competition, but it might be what we call co-opetition. People that are going for the same customer, but can learn ways to work together. And so I just have a sense you and Sharon will really hit it off. And I trust, my instinct on these, and I'm more right than wrong on this. So how can they learn more about you?
Thank you so much. For more information, you can log on to etiquetteedu.com.
Etiquetteedu.com. You got that? We'll
Yep.
get that. Great.
Mhm.
Okay, this was great. Great fun. Excellent. Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you. Sometimes we have so much information and knowledge swirling in our heads that you just kind of live it out every day. So when someone asks you to share it, I appreciate those moments. So thank you very much.